Rockaways Productions presents The Casey Waters Show, episode 473, Poverty by America, by Matthew Desmond, Part 3. Hello, I'm your host, Casey Waters. Today, I have Merrill with me. He's right at my side, probably out of camera range, at least for now. So, today, I will continue with Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond. Here, the author explains why poverty is widespread in America. Also, the author explains ways we could reduce poverty in America. Today's show will feature background footage from Lane Pinnacle. Lane Pinnacle is located off the Blue Ridge Parkway, north of Asheville, North Carolina. To get there, take the Blue Ridge Parkway, heading north. You'll go through a tunnel, and then you'll go past the Lane Pinnacle Overlook. Maybe a couple miles or so past that, you'll see a sign that says, "Entering Asheville Watershed, no parking, except at overlooks." Well, shortly past this sign is a little dirt area off to the side of the parkway to park. You park there, then you continue walking north along the parkway for perhaps a couple hundred yards or so. You'll see a trail coming up from the right, from below. To get to Lane Pinnacle, you take the trail across the parkway, going up the steep hill. This trail is hard to follow. It is recommended that you have a good GPS system while you're hiking, as well as a map of this trail. So now, let's continue with Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond. The Economic Recovery Tax Act of 1981, proposed by Congressman Jack Kemp and signed into law by President Reagan, reduced federal tax revenues by more than 13% over 4 years. The act included across-the-board cuts to income taxes, including a 20 percentage point reduction in the top marginal tax rate, and slashed estate taxes as well. Republican overexuberance rocked the economy. In the immediate aftermath of this legislation, the deficit began to expand. Interest rates climbed and markets flagged. Reagan was forced to right the ship somewhat by raising taxes on businesses the following year. But it was the public sector that paid the biggest price for the president's budgetary reprioritization. Reagan reduced funding for the Department of Housing and Urban Development, not by 20 or 40%, but by almost 70%. The agencies whose budget was once second only to the Department of Defense, the agency that had replaced slums with once safe and dependable housing, soon couldn't pay for its building's trash collection or elevator repair. Now, let's go to page 120, towards the middle of the page, of Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond. How do we today make the poor in America poor in at least three ways. First, we exploit them. We constrain their choice and power in the labor market, the housing market, and the financial market, driving down wages while forcing the poor to overpay for housing and access to cash and credit. Those of us who are not poor benefit from these arrangements. Corporations benefit from worker exploitation, sure, but so do consumers who buy the cheap goods and services the working poor produce. And so do those of us directly or indirectly invested in the stock market. Landlords are not the only ones who benefit from housing exploitation. Many homeowners do too. Their property values propped up by the collective effort to make housing scarce and expensive. The banking and payday lending industries profit from the financial exploitation of the poor, but so do those of us with free checking accounts at Bank of America or Wells Fargo, as those accounts are subsidized by billions of dollars in overdraft fees. If we burn coal, we get electricity, but we get sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide and other airborne toxins too. We can't have the electricity without producing the pollution. Opulence in America works the same way. Someone bears the cost. Second, we prioritize the subsidization of affluence over the alleviation of poverty. The United States could effectively end poverty in America tomorrow without increasing the deficit if it cracked down on corporations and family who cheat on their taxes, reallocating the newfound revenue to those most in need of it. Instead, we let the rich slide and give the most to those who have plenty already, creating a welfare state that heavily favors the upper class. And then our elected officials have the audacity, the shamelessness, really, to fabricate stories about poor people's dependency on government aid and shoot down proposals to reduce poverty because they would cost too much. Glancing at the price tag of some program that would cut child poverty in half or give all Americans access to a doctor, they suck their teeth and ask, "But how can we afford it? How can we afford it?" What a sinful question. What a selfish, dishonest question. One asked as if the answer wasn't staring us straight in the face. We could afford it if we allowed the IRS to do its job. We could afford it if the well-off among us took less from the government. We could afford it if we designed our welfare state to expand opportunity and not guard fortunes. Now, let's go to page 124, towards the middle of the page, of Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond. But let's reach for something more. How much would it cost to end poverty? Not to reduce it by 10% or even cut it in half, but to abolish it entirely. In 2020, the gap separating everyone in America below the poverty line and the poverty line itself amounted to $177 billion. I arrived at this rough estimate by multiplying the number of families and individuals below the line with the average amount they would need to rise above it. Now, this figure is on top of current welfare spending, and it doesn't account for either the administrative cost of delivering aid, which would raise the estimate, or gains made by addressing issues like labor and housing exploitation, which would lower it. Really nailing down the cost of ensuring that every American enjoys a decent level of economic security would take a lot more calculating. But 177 billion is a good place to start. It helps us begin to understand what we're talking about when we talk about ending poverty in America. And what we're talking about is a goal that is irresistibly attainable. $177 billion is less than 1% of our GDP. Americans throw away more than that amount in food every year. What could 177 billion buy? Quite a lot. We can ensure that every person in America had a safer and more affordable place to live. Every single one of us. We could have put a real dent in ending homelessness in America. We could end hunger. We could provide every child with a fair shot at security and success. We could make immense headway in driving down the many agonizing correlates of poverty, like violence, sickness, and despair. Crime rates would plummet, eviction rates too. Neighborhoods would stabilize and come alive. Schools could focus more on education instead of dedicating so many resources to triaging the deep needs of their students. So now, let's go to page 134. Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond. But then, thanks to the hard work of community organizers, heroic government bureaucrats, and housing advocates around the country, the distribution channels opened, and funds started flowing, eventually reaching millions of renting families. As a result, eviction filings remained well below historical levels months after the eviction moratorium ended, even as rent and inflation rose. In December 2021, eviction filings were down 39% in Minneapolis, 53% in Albuquerque, and 64% in Austin. This was astonishing. The Emergency Rental Assistance Program, in tandem with other pandemic aid like the expanded child tax credit, had cut the eviction filing rate in half in city after city across the United States. Eviction rates were lower than they had ever been on record. Now, let's go to page 136, towards the bottom of the page, of Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond. In previous generations and in recent memory, government investments have resulted in tremendous reductions in the number of Americans living in poverty. We can go further, and it wouldn't be hard to find the money to do so. By one estimate, simply collecting unpaid federal income taxes from the top 1% of households would bring in some $175 billion a year. We could just about fill the entire poverty gap in America if the richest amongst us simply paid all the taxes they owed. Now, let's go to page 142. Sectoral bargaining, as it is called, would impact tens of millions of Americans who have never benefited from a union of their own, just as it has improved the lives of workers in Europe and Latin America. In Austria, for example, sector by sector collective bargaining established a countrywide minimum monthly wage of 1,500 euros in 2017. Sectoral bargaining would even the playing field, not only between workers and bosses, but also between companies within the same sector that would no longer be locked into a race to the bottom, incentivized to shortchange their workforce to gain a competitive edge. Instead, the companies would be forced to compete over the quality of goods and services they offer. Maybe we'd finally reap the benefits of all that economic productivity we were promised. Now, let's go to page 154, near the bottom of the page, and continuing on to page 155 of Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond. I find the abortion debate in America frustratingly abstract. What are the limits of bodily integrity? When does life begin? I don't know how to answer these questions. I do know, concretely, that the Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe v. Wade and claw back the national right to abortion will have devastating consequences for poor women. We could, of course, ensure that no child in America is born into poverty. We could make sure all women have access to the best contraception and health care, helping more pregnancies become intentional and safer. We could provide new mothers with strong supports like paid parental leave and free child care, which is all to say, a country as wealthy as ours could put our money where our mouth is when it comes to supporting life. But from the poor, we just seem to take and take. Now, let's go to page 162, towards the middle of the page, of Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond. By deconcentrating poverty in schools and communities, integration blunts its sting. Simply moving poor families to high opportunity neighborhoods without doing anything to increase their incomes improves their lives tremendously. Even if they remain below the poverty line, they become less poor, in the sense that their exposure to crime drops, and their mental health improves, and their children flourish in school. Studies have found that each year that poor children spend in a high opportunity neighborhood increases their income in adulthood so much that younger siblings experience bigger gains than their older brothers and sisters because of the additional years spent in a safer and more prosperous place. Now, let's go to page 163, towards the bottom of the page. Integration works. That's the resounding conclusion from a half a century of research. Consider the impact of school integration after the Supreme Court ruled in Brown versus Board of Education that laws upholding racial segregation in public schools were unconstitutional in the years following the 1954 decision. Desegregation orders were unevenly enforced throughout the nation, allowing social scientists to compare black children who went to integrated schools with those who attended segregated ones. The economist Rucker Johnson did just that, finding that black children who were enrolled in integrated schools performed better in the classroom, graduated at higher rates, and were more likely to go to college than their peers who experienced a segregated education. These educational gains had a real cash value, as Johnson's models showed that black students who benefited from court-ordered integration were significantly less likely to experience poverty as adults. Meanwhile, white children whose schools desegregated remained on track. Their economic achievement and later life well-being did not suffer as a result of their new black classmates. Now, let's go to page 167. Do affordable housing developments cause property values to decline? If they are built poorly and not maintained, then yes, just as any kind of neglected housing would. But studies have found that when affordable housing blends into the surrounding community and when it is well managed and well distributed instead of being clustered in one place, it has zero effect on property values. In the years since New Jersey began economically integrating its communities more aggressively than any other state, its property values have remained among the highest in the nation, and it ranks first in public education. Congress could incentivize more communities to invest in affordable housing with federal dollars that could be used to offset local property taxes or improve public services. What if homeowners enjoyed a bit more money in their pockets if they voted yes on affordable housing? What if the local elementary school was able to rehab its gymnasium or hire more teachers if its community welcomed more low-income families? Now, let's go to page 174, towards the bottom of the page, of Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond. Let's call it the scarcity diversion. Here's the playbook. First, allow elites to hoard a resource like money or land. Second, pretend that arrangement is natural, unavoidable, or better yet, ignore it altogether. Third, attempt to address social problems caused by the resource hoarding only with the scarce resources left over. So instead of making the rich pay all of their taxes, for instance, design a welfare state around the paltry budget you are left with when they don't. Fourth, fail. Fail to drive down the poverty rate. Fail to build more affordable housing. Fifth, claim this is the best we could do. Preface your comments by saying, in a world of scarce resources, blame government programs, blame capitalism, blame the other political party, blame immigrants, blame anyone you can except those who most deserve it. Gaslighting is not too strong a phrase to describe such pretense. Now, let's go to page 183, near the top of the page. Poverty abolition is a political and personal project. Those of us who embrace this project seek to divest from poverty in our consumer choices, investment decision, and jobs. We support a government actively striving to end scarcity by rebalancing the nation's safety net and expanding policies that empower the poor. We detest all forms of exploitation, whether it is carried out by corporations, property owners, or financial institutions, even if, especially if, it benefits us. We oppose racism, segregation, and opportunity hoarding in our communities and stand for shared prosperity. Poverty abolitionists are solutionists, doers, prioritizing plan over critique, tangible wins over rhetorical ones, usefulness over purity, and we must organize. Now, let's go to page 186, towards the bottom of the page, of Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond. Anti-poverty movements are doing just that. People's Action, whose tagline is Join Our Joyous Rebellion, has brought rural and urban poor. Casey Waters Show. Producer, Casey Waters. Graphic editing, Judson Laird. Please note our new email address, CaseyWaters2 @CaseyWaters.com.